Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is Erica Davis, also known as Wild Food Girl. Please welcome her to the show. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, AJ. How are you?
Good. Well, what the heck is a wild food girl?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, so I've been interested in wild food foraging for a long time, and now I teach classes on it. I'm writing a book about it. Um, so yeah, I collect wild plants for food and incorporate them into my daily eating.
Is all wild food plants? Is all wild food vegan?
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, there's definitely plenty of people like to hunt and fish. And then there are mushrooms. So plants and mushrooms are what I gather.
Nice. Well, how long have
Yeah.
you followed a vegan or plant-based diet, and what inspired you to go that direction in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been whole food, plant-based, mostly SOS-free, so free of salt, oil, and sugar for 3.5 years now. And that came about because, honestly, I'm working on this book about wild food, and people often ask me about the nutrients that are in the plants that we're gathering and eating. And so I was reading up on nutrition. I happened to be reading T. Colin Campbell's book Whole, when I found a tumor in my breast. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so what became for me kind of a theoretical read turned into, wow, I need to make a big change for my health. And I have to say, there's nothing like cancer for lighting a fire under you to change everything. So I kind of went cold turkey. I threw out all the processed food that I had. I read every book and watched every video I could about whole food plant-based eating, and pretty much went cold turkey 3.5 years ago. So,
Wow. So what was your diet like before?
oh wow. It's funny because, and I will say this, on the whole food plant-based diet, I lost 25 pounds in 4 months. And I wouldn't say I was heavy before, but I always thought, I'm athletic, I can eat anything I want, I exercise and so forth. So I ate anything I wanted. And I loved, I ate fairly healthy. I ate a lot of salads in the middle of the day, but for lunchtime. But I definitely, when I was working as a snowboard trainer, I would pack an I would eat an egg sandwich first thing in the morning with mayonnaise on the bread and egg and cheese. That was my breakfast. And I would pack a salami sandwich for lunch. So I definitely have made some changes since then.
That's amazing. Had you heard much about the vegan or plant-based diet before? And what brought you to read the China study in the first place?
Yeah, it's funny because I can't remember why I picked that particular book up, but I did know I was looking for nutritional information about plants beyond what I just suspected or what I knew from my wild food reading. So I just think it was really serendipitous that I picked that book up. I was not familiar with whole food plant based, and I had to look up what SOS free meant. I mean, this has been an evolution of my diet. I didn't get the SOS free right away, so yeah, no, I was not that aware. I mean, I was aware that people were vegan, but then you go to a vegan restaurant, you get junk food vegan, you get deep fried stuff and, a lot of bread and things like that, depending on the orientation of the restaurant.
Absolutely. Well, you said you live in Colorado. That isn't that a very plant-forward kind of state?
I would say yes. Definitely, there are some restaurants now that I'm looking for specific types of restaurants that I'm excited about in the Denver area. I live at 10,000 feet in Colorado's mountains in the little town of Fairplay, where I live. I'm an hour from the nearest grocery store that has a big organic selection. So we don't have, we have nice restaurants in town, but I wouldn't say that they're plant forward. You know.
Right. Well, is that why you have to be a forager because there's no stores near you?
Well, it is funny you mentioned that because my dandelions are just coming into season right now outside the house. And it's wonderful because I get them for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on the weather. And I don't have to travel an hour away. I can just eat from the yard. So, yeah, that is one of the bonuses of foraging for
Yeah.
sure.
But how do you know to be safe? Because are some plants potentially poisonous?
Yeah, yeah, there are definitely poisonous plants out there. I actually just did a web class on poisonous plants. There are a lot of poisonous plants, but the thing is, to learn edible plants, you go one by one. So you learn how to identify a dandelion. If it has poisonous lookalikes, which I would say dandelion doesn't, none that I can think of, then that's a more advanced plant to forage. So if you just learn one by one, you learn one, you learn how to cook it, you learn how you like it, you start incorporating it into your diet, then you're ready to go to the next one and learn the next one. So I think it can be done very safely. But yeah, in the books, if it has a poisonous look-alike or a similar looking plant that's poisonous, it'll say that in the books, and you just proceed more cautiously, make sure you're 100% sure of your identification before you pick it.
Nice. How did you get interested in this?
Yeah, I was a kid. My uncle had Yule Gibbon's book, Stalking the Wild Asparagus, which is famous, and he loved to try things and give my sister and I things to try. And I just remember being so struck by the idea that something growing in a wild space could be edible. You're a kid, you think food comes from the grocery store, comes from the restaurant, comes from mom. It doesn't come from the forest, So I just was always interested, and I dabbled as a kid and I dabbled as a teenager, and then it became a full-blown obsession
That's
as an
neat.
adult. Yeah.
That's it. And so is the book you're writing just about the wild edibles, or actually how to like use them in cuisine?
Yes, both things. Now, I wouldn't say I'm not a chef. So when I figure out a wild edible and how I like to use it, how I like to eat it, it is for very practical, simple home cooking. I have, will I eat it? Will my husband eat it? So in that book, I have a curated selection of plants found in the Western US, but also weeds that are found more widely throughout the country. And then, so there's identification information and pictures, and then when and how to pick it, because that's what is lost on a lot of people. Like, you don't pick the dandelions when they're already in the fluff head stage, and then, yeah, I have suggestions on how to cook it and how to make it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So looks like you've got a couple of pots behind you.
Yeah. Yes, and I've been heating things up. Yeah, so what I have today to make is a dandelion soup. Dandelions, do you have you eaten fresh dandelions?
I
Dandelion
don't think
green?
I have actually. So when you say dandelion, are those the flowers, or not flowers, but maybe they're weeds like you see outside where they're kind of yellow and pretty and
Yes. Yes, they're yellow and pretty, and I'll show some pictures of them in a minute, or after we get the soup started. So yeah, dandelions, pretty common throughout most of the US. There are some gaps like in Florida and parts of Texas, but pretty common weed with those yellow flower heads made up of many hundreds of petals. Uh, yeah, but actually, if you're going to use the greens for food, you're going to want to get your dandelions before they start flowering in earnest. So, and can you see me okay?
Mhm. I
Yeah,
can see the
okay.
stove behind you and a couple of pots on it.
Okay, great. So, yeah, so dandelion soup. So dandelions have a reputation for being bitter. Here's my bowl of dandelions that I gathered recently. And actually, I have to, well, let me start the soup and then I'll tell you my dandelion story.
Okay.
So those are dandelion greens gathered before much flowering started on the plants. So the dandelion soup we're making today is a traditional Italian soup called minestre. I learned this from my father-in-law's late wife, Carol. She grew up in suburban Philadelphia in a multi-generational Italian family, and her grandparents would go out every spring, gather dandelions to make this soup that she knows as minestre. She actually never liked having the soup, but I don't know if that was more about why do we have to eat weird stuff that nobody else eats, as much as it was about the actual soup. So I picked her brain about how to make this soup. So minestre is traditional. I think that name is a predecessor of minestrone. So it's a vegetable soup, but it doesn't have the beans and the pasta in it. So basically, it's the simplest soup ever. This is my kind of cooking.
I noticed there's an instant pot in your counter, but you're going to make this in a regular traditional pot.
Yeah, but I do have a comment about that. I make the broth in the Instant Pot. I love making broth in the Instant Pot. Yeah, so I'm going to make this on the stove. So basically, the Manest is you make a vegetable soup, a basic vegetable soup. That's going to go in this pot. I already have the broth heating up. And then this is just a pot of water that's heating up. You boil the dandelions separately and then you plate them together. So the mistake people make when working with dandelions, one of the mistakes is throwing them right into the soup and they make the soup too bitter. So when
Mm.
you do this brief boil first, you lose some of the bitterness into the water. It still is a somewhat bitter soup meant as an appetizer. But yeah, so I'm just I'm probably preaching to the choir about the broth. I'm sure you make your own broths in the Instapot.
Well, I used to, but now I buy the little powdered broth from local spicery. But I used to
Oh,
for many years with scraps, actually.
yeah, that's what I do too. And honestly, this was my mom's idea, and I always buy organic, so I have all these nice scraps. So I just keep them in the freezer, and then whenever I want to make a broth, it's so simple in the Instapot. Put it up to the line, put water up to the line, start it for 30 minutes. But I wanted to mention about broth. See if okay. So I like all scraps in the broth except for any of the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and kale because they can impart a bitterness. But I have an artichoke here, and I wanted to say so wild foods go great in the broth. Wild edible plants are great to put in a broth too, and especially thistles. And I'm holding the artichoke because it is closely related to thistles. In fact, this part of the artichoke is called its thistle. So if I steam up one of these, I'll put the leaves in my broth. But if I have thistles that I'm weeding, yeah, there's a couple of different non-native thistles that are pretty weedy and everywhere. I'll put the roots in the broth. I'll put the greens in the broth. So you can use wild foods to make nice broths. And I'm starting with a broth. The original recipe started with water, but I just like adding a little more flavor with that broth because I'm not putting any herbs or bouillon in there, although you can do that. So,
Nice. I sometimes teach at a really wonderful spot in Mexico called Rancho La Puerta. And it's the first time I ever had something that is, I believe, a wild edible, something called purslane that they call verdolago.
yeah, that's actually, I have, for the presentation at the end, I have some pictures of purslane, and I'd love to talk about that. Did you like it?
I loved it. I actually preferred it raw, like in salads, to cooked because it got a little bit slimy cooked. But I had heard about it from a doctor named Carrie Saunders, a plant-based doctor at Vegetarian Summerfest, who was offering it as an alternative to people that either didn't want to or couldn't eat nuts because it was so high in omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah, that's my understanding is that is the highest source of omega-3 fatty acids in the plant kingdom. Yeah, I love verdolagas.
Yeah, it's good. And it's so inexpensive. Like I actually haven't seen it since I moved to Northern California, but when I was in Southern California, 4 bunches were like $1.
Yeah, and then if you have it growing in your garden,
It's
it's
free.
free. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I agree with you 100% about eat it raw, better than cooked. I do have a couple cooked preparations I use it in, but I prefer it raw also. So I'm going to throw these veggies in the pot to get them started. I've cut them all up. So I'm talking real basic veggies. I have onions and carrots into the broth. Whoops. And I've got celery and tomatoes. Well, and last but not least, potatoes that I chopped up. I have them soaking in water.
I see you have the Berkey water filter.
Yes, I love that. In fact, the water that I put for the dandelions came from the Berkey because I'm gonna save the cooking water to drink as tea. So I wanted my filtered water in there. But yeah, okay, so I'm gonna just set this for 20 minutes. It does take longer at high elevation to boil things, so hopefully we'll get this soup done in time, but I'm pretty much just boiling it until the potatoes are cooked. So I'll check it at 20 minutes. The dandelions only take a couple of minutes to cook. So we'll prep them now, and then we'll check the soup at 20 minutes. And if it's just about ready, I'll drop the dandelions in. At this elevation, they take about 4 minutes. You pretty much just cook them until they're softened.
Why does it take longer for water to boil? And like, I always remember that you have to bake at different temperatures too at high elevations, right?
Yeah, I meant to look that up to have a good explanation for you, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
That's
I think the
okay.
boiling point, is it that the boiling point is higher? Okay, don't quote me on that. The boiling point is lower. My husband's in the background yelling that to me. Awesome.
I just always wondered about that.
Yeah. Yes, and I've been here so long now. I get really surprised when I'm visiting my mom and cooking, and things happen so fast. But yeah, so these are the dandelions. I have to tell you the hoops I had to jump through to get these dandelions in time for this show, because my dandelions at 10,000 feet were starting to look great. And then 2 days ago, we got a foot of snow. So,
A foot of snow in May?
yes, a foot of snow. That is life in the mountains. Yeah. And it melted off pretty quickly. But so then it was Mother's Day. I was thinking, where am I going to get these dandelions? Because I want them to be perfect. So we went down to Denver, and I looked around. All the dandelions were past their prime. And I should have known that. I mean, I do know that. So what I mean by past their prime is that lots and lots of flowers had already happened and then even gone to seed. So what happens is the greens are, people say they're more bitter after flowering, but for me the biggest problem is that they're tough after flowering. They're no longer the right stage for harvest. So then we went up to 8,000 feet to my sister-in-law's house, and I was really lucky that her dandelions were in perfect shape. So these are beautiful, perfect dandelions. If you get a couple of flowers happening, it's no big deal. You just eat a leaf and see if it's tough. If it's tough, go to a different dandelion. So, and I have some pictures about how to do the harvest. I will admit we get really beautiful dandelions up here where I live, and Denver gets beautiful dandelions, which are really robust and leafy dandelions. So they start to lift off the ground a little bit in the spring, and you want to take the center of the rosette and cut that, because then you don't get all this sand. I already washed these, but what I would do if I suspected there could be sand, because that's obviously not something you want to eat, is I would put a small amount in a bowl, fill it with water, plunge, 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 pull the dandelions out. And if there's sand in the bottom of the bowl, I would clean out the bowl and just repeat that. So I get a nice batch.
What kind of nutritional benefit do wild edibles have, as opposed to just having, plants that you either grow or buy in the grocery store?
Sure. Well, I mean, the ones that you grow are similar in that you're picking them at their peak of freshness and their peak of nutrients. You do get some nutrient loss when they've been sitting at the store or sitting in your refrigerator. And then, it kind of depends which plants in terms of how nutrient dense they are. But our wild plants tend to be higher in a number of phytochemicals. In cultivating, for example, broccoli, we've worked with it enough that it's not as bitter as it might be, let's say, if broccoli grew in the wild, which it doesn't, but relatives of it do. So some of the wild mustards, some of the cruciferous vegetables, they'll have a stronger flavor, but they also might be stronger in valuable phytochemicals that, in my case, I might want for preventing cancer's recurrence, So usually they're nutrient dense, they're picked at the peak of freshness, they're organic. You got to forage them from a clean location, but they're organic. So, I like that about wild food. And I also like the act of picking or observing and picking and being in nature. I feel like there are really nice health benefits to doing that as well. So
Nice.
but yeah, dandelion in particular is high. I'm going to look at my notes here. Is high in vitamins A, very high in vitamins A, K, and beta carotene. High in vitamins E, C, and riboflavin. If this means much to you. Sometimes it starts to sound just like a list to me, but high in B6, folate, calcium, iron, potassium, and manganese. You get some nutrient loss when you boil them, but then we're going to drink the tea, and the nutrients that went into the water, we will get them in a different form.
Do you make sure to include them in your diet every day,
Dandelions?
or any kind
No,
of wild edibles?
any kind of, oh, I don't make a specific effort to use them every day. I think for me, I use the most seasonally, from spring to fall when things are in season. I do store some things, so then I'll dip into the freezer for some of my wild edibles that I've put up, or I dry things. I don't necessarily try to get them in my diet every day, but they are, another benefit is that diversity to the microbiome as well. We get our store-bought vegetables. I feel like the stores are much better now in having a variety of heirloom vegetables. You can get 5 different sweet potatoes or yams, whereas 20 years ago you maybe could pick one yam. But yeah, they do offer quite a good diversity for the microbiome. So.
How did our ancestors even eat sweet potatoes? I mean, at what point did fire come in? Because I don't care for them raw.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, I mean, wasn't fire came in the Stone Age, right? I think when people started eating meat, they had made their stone tools, you know. But yeah, some cultivated and wild vegetables are too dense in certain phytochemicals, and they need to be processed in order to be rendered edible. So cassava is a good example of that. That's high in compounds that produce cyanide, which we know to be poisonous, but with processing, this cassava becomes edible, more edible, and it's widely used as a food source. So you have that with some wild edibles too. Dandelions are pretty much just edible across the board. Any part is edible if you could chew it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm going to chop these dandelions and get them ready. So for the soup, you can see I have a huge pile of dandelions, and that is because they cook down. So I'm just going to rough chop those into the 2 to 3 inch pieces and get them ready for when the soup is ready. But by this point, I feel like they really do look like a food. And if you don't want to forage dandelions, you can get them at a lot of grocery stores at this point, health food stores. But now, Chef AJ, I saw that you have experimented with like dandelion roots, right? For making.
Nope, not me.
Oh, you haven't?
Nope.
Like dandelion root coffee?
I haven't. I've heard of it.
Oh, okay.
I've heard of dandelion tea as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think I watched the ice cream making special that you had recently, the nice cream special. There was a woman demonstrating, or maybe it wasn't recently, maybe it was an older video, and I just
and she was just and she was using edibles. Wow.
Well, I mean, you can buy dandelion roots. So I think she had purchased them, but she talked about making either a coffee flavored one, or you could do one of those mushroom coffee blends, I think she had. And then she also mentioned dandelion coffee, because I like to do a dandelion coffee nice cream with frozen bananas and.
What does it taste like?
Coffee.
Oh, wow.
To me, it tastes like coffee, but slightly better. And it's not caffeinated, and it's full of good nutrients. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so the dandelions are ready to go when it's time to drop them in, but again, we're going to wait until the soup is coming along. I wonder, would this be a good time to show the dandelion part of my presentation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm just going to share the screen for a second here.
Yeah. Those are pretty. I remember
Yeah.
those.
So do you not see a lot of them where you live?
No, not anymore. And I don't remember seeing them in the desert, but growing up, I always thought they were flowers when I was little.
Yeah, well, they are flowers. Yeah. It's actually interesting because the flower heads of the dandelion, you would think that has a bunch of petals, and actually each of those petals is an individual flower. So dandelions are called composite flowers for that reason. But you can eat the petals, and they are quite sweet. And then if you eat the green part on the back, that adds a bitter element. And then the stem is kind of nice when it's young and still in bud. You can eat that too. I put this slide here and I'll just rest it here for a second in case people want to refer back to it, but we don't have to go over all of these identification features here. But dandelions, when they're not flowering, they might be a little harder for people to identify. They usually have back pointed lobes. And they produce a white milky sap similar to lettuce, to which they are closely related. So this is what I'm talking about. This is a perfect dandelion to gather for greens. This is spring happened and the leaves and the sun hit it and there was a little moisture and the leaves are starting to lift up and look like a garden vegetable. So this is what I'm looking for. Again, if it has a bud, if it has one flower, just try the leaf to see if it's tough. These were some amazing, huge dandelions that I found. And you can see what I did here. I cut out just the center leaves of each of them, and it took about 5 minutes to fill my bag. So free produce right there.
So you're not really eating the yellow part.
So you can eat the yellow flowers. You absolutely can. In fact, you know what? In the wild food world, what people do is they make fritters out of them. They take the flowers, and they dip them in a batter of egg and white flour, and then they fry them in oil. I like to take the flower heads and just chop them up and add them to, let's see, I do a pan bread with chickpea flour and water, a little bit of turmeric and garlic. And then I chop up my dandelion flowers and put them in that batter and put it in the pan. For some reason in my ceramic nonstick pan, they just don't stick, and I don't need to use oil for that pan bread. But yeah, so you can use the flowers for lots of things. I chop them up and put them into a curry. But what I like, well, for this soup, it's the greens that you use before flowering. People make wine out of the flowers too.
Interesting.
That's actually, I just like that picture because it looks like food.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like something I've seen that's not dandelion greens. I'm trying to think which is something you find in the market.
Yeah, well, have you purchased chicory greens or it might, I think they look a little bit like chicory. I'm trying to think what else. There are some leafy greens that are finely cut like fricassee.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't always use the greens for the soup. It is one of my favorite things, but here I like to chop them up, because they're a little bit bitter. I like to chop them up with other ingredients. So in this case, I was making veggie burgers.
Those look delicious.
They are wonderful, and we can't keep them in stock in the freezer. I mean, my husband goes through them. And actually, this recipe is from the website Cookie and Kate, and they're called Favorite Veggie Burgers. And all I did was chop up dandelions and put them in there. So extra greens, extra healthful greens. But yes, I love those. So, and then we talked about this, but yeah, you can use the flowers too. So if you just use the petals, they're kind of painstaking to gather. But if you have a bunch of children visiting, you can put them to work. If you just want the flowers, people put them in cookies. Like I could see putting them in your banana oat cookies that I make all the time.
Wow. But how drastically does it change the flavor of a recipe?
To be honest with you, the flowers don't change the rest of the flavor very much at all. People make cookies, they make sugar syrups out of dandelion flower petals. I think it's a really subtle flavor by the time you cook it. But now when I do those flatbreads, I also use this green part, the back part of the dandelion head, which adds bitterness to it, but it gets balanced by those other ingredients. You know, dandelion roots are also edible. They can be eaten as a vegetable.
Really? So the brown part, you eat that. That's probably much more crunchy, right?
Yeah, so and just a word on that, because yeah, so you can eat the roots, but dandelions are a perennial, which means that the root is only a good like roasted or boiled vegetable in its first year of life. Shortly after that, they start to develop this woody core that makes them not as good of a vegetable per se. So like if you want to use the roots, you pretty much want to gather them from somebody's garden where they weeded every year, and you know you're getting new roots. Otherwise, and you see I chopped these up. So you know when I'm weeding, I save all my dandelions, and then I hit them with the hose to get most of the dirt off, chop them up into even pieces, lay them out to dry. I mean, if you're in the West, you can just lay them out to dry in a cardboard box. You know, if you're in the East where it's more humid, or anywhere that is more humid, you might want to use a dehydrator or the oven on low, but you dry them out and then you roast them. There's lots of different ways to do it. Like I roast them at about 350 degrees for about 45 minutes till you get this like amazing kind of chocolatey aroma in the house. And these are what you grind to make dandelion coffee. So once they're roasted, buzz them in the coffee grinder. I usually boil them briefly on the stovetop a couple of minutes just to really extract the flavor, but that is your dandelion coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can buy this, you know, you don't have to pick it and do it. I like to, and I don't like to waste, and I have them right there.
And I'm guessing it's caffeine free. Does it taste similar to regular coffee?
To me, it tastes a little bit better than regular coffee. I like the flavor a little bit better, but it is reminiscent of it. And, you know, in colonial times, people not only made dandelion coffee, they made chicory coffee. There are a lot of different wild roots that a coffee substitute was made with when people couldn't get coffee. So, yeah, and I like it iced. I like it warm. Yeah, you could sweeten it with maple syrup if you want, or, you know, I sometimes use I don't know if you have any good well, you probably do. You probably have awesome ideas for sweetening a beverage, but I've found
I
that to
like date syrup, but you know, maple syrup's pretty similar. I like date syrup though.
does it dissolve well?
Yeah, yeah, not date sugar, because date sugar is just ground up dates, but date syrup is a liquid sweetener. So yes, it should dissolve.
I can't believe I haven't tried that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're 10,000 feet, but they have it at Walmart.
Yeah, I have date syrup. I just thought, oh, it'll never dissolve. I like it on my nice cream, but okay, I'll
No,
have to.
it should dissolve in hot beverages.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I would think so.
Yeah, because I've been experimenting with stevia a little bit, and I think you don't favor stevia.
I
If
find
I
it so incredibly bitter.
Oh, bitter, really? I
Yeah,
find it like cloyingly sweet. Like I could only
yeah.
use the tiniest bit, but and I don't like the white powdered stuff. I just get the pure leaf that's dried and
Mm-hmm.
pulverized. But I don't use it a ton. And sometimes I just, you know, just drink this with some plant milk in it, and you know, it's a nice balance there. So let me see. I'm going to stop sharing here for a second and check the soup and see how we're coming along. Let's see. Trying to fish out a potato. See how that potato's coming. Yeah, well, I would say that's pretty close. So it's time to put the dandelions in. And I've had these on low. Whoops. So that should be pretty good heat level. Oh yeah, it's boiling. So the whole thing is going in there. It's a lot.
How long will you boil it for?
Yeah, so here at elevation, it usually takes about 4 minutes. So I'm going to set the timer for 4 minutes. I think it would be less at lower elevations. What you're looking for is just that the dandelions soften. They cook enough to soften, so it feels like a nice vegetable in your mouth. So I have to cover that a little bit to make sure it stays warm. And then we have, yeah, for 4 minutes there. So while we're waiting for the 4 minutes, let's see, just a word on the dandelion leaf tea. So that is pretty neat. It comes out bright green, so hopefully I can show that. But yeah, dandelion leaf tea is also, I keep saying the word bitter. I hope I'm not turning people off. It is a little bit of a bitter brew, but it's very healthful. It's a tonic for the kidneys and the liver. It makes you pee. It's a diuretic, so don't drink a ton of it before your road trip. But
Well, if people are used to eating a lot of processed food, especially sugar, they'll find pretty much all vegetable material fairly bitter.
yeah, well, it's funny you say that because after I quit the sugar, a couple weeks later, all of a sudden I enjoy bitter foods a little bit more, just, and I enjoy a soup that the broth is just veggie broth with more veggies cooked in it. It's very plain. It's a very plain soup. We don't have much else in it. But I find it's full of flavors, especially if you can get garden fresh vegetables. Yeah.
Well, you can't get them much fresher than if you forage them yourself.
Well, that's true. That's true. Oh, we have a couple of minutes. Should I show you other things in my fridge that
I
I
would
foraged?
love to see it.
I accidentally left these in my bag overnight, so the vegetables are not as pretty as they would have been. Okay, let's see. I actually have a lot of stuff in there. Just all wild stuff. This one is a plant called, or is this the auric? Yeah. This one is called auric. It's oh no, this is the bellflower, sorry. So these guys, you're not going to be able to identify the plant from these pieces, but this is a non-native plant called creeping bellflower that's been planted all over the nation in landscaping. It has these tall spires of dangling purple bells, and just if you can recognize these greens in spring, they are really nice. You just chop them up, boil them, and they're really nice in sag paneer. So I try to get a lot of it when I can because it's an invasive plant. It takes over people's gardens, and it makes a really nice spring vegetable.
So when you see things on outside, it's basically free, right?
What's that?
It's free. When you find it outside, it's free.
Yeah, I mean, so there are rules that, a lot of public parks don't want you picking their plants. So that was in my friend's backyard, and they are trying to eradicate that plant. So they said, take as much as you want. But yes, free. Yep. And then this one, whoops, I'm flinging things around the kitchen. This one is called Japanese knotweed. And for the people who have this growing near them, it's a real scourge. It's a real invasive species. It looks kind of like bamboo. It's green with reddish spots. And this is one of the ones I left overnight in my bag. So it's a little sad right now. But this is very high in resveratrol, at least in the roots. And what you do is you just peel off this outer casing. And then the stalk has a tart flavor. People use it as a rhubarb analog. Oops. Okay, so it's so good. It's tart and delicious. I like it in rings on my salad. Okay,
And you find this stuff just growing outside.
Yeah, so if you're anywhere in the eastern United States, that thing is gangbusters. Like people are trying to eradicate it because it's a very harmful invasive species. Here in Colorado, in the central west, I guess, it's not quite as pervasive. But over the years, hiking around different areas, I know my spots. I go back to them at the right time of year to pick the vegetables. Yeah, so okay, let's have a look at these dandelions. I'm just going to pull a little bit out and give it a test to see if I think it's tender. Probably go 2 more minutes, actually. All right, well, let me just show you how to put this together, and then I'll just finish it. So basically, when everything's done, you just grab a mound of dandelions, put them in your bowl. Plate it with soup. And so this is, you get this very, yeah, I don't know if I can, you get a really brothy vegetable soup. So the minestre is traditionally served with sausage on top and Parmesan cheese or Romano cheese or whatever kind of hard cheese. So I like to use a vegan Parmesan. And, I actually like Dr. Greger's recipe from the How Not to Die cookbook, which is nutty Parmesan. He's got Brazil nuts, almonds, nutritional yeast, and his own spice blend in there. But in a pinch, I just blend up almonds and nutritional yeast. And then sprinkle that on top. And it's a nice finish with a little bit of fattiness and a little bit of umami. Oops. Right, that was a little more than I intended, but just that's the finished soup.
It's nice.
So that's minestre.
Well, even if it's not wild edibles, it's always great to just add grains to your cooked soups.
Yeah, I haven't done that. Do you do that regularly?
Almost always, whether it's cauliflower bisque or butternut bisque, we always put handfuls of usually arugula in. We just like it that way. We don't cook it in because it wilts so quickly just from being the raw once you put it in hot soup.
Sure. So you don't find the arugula get bitter?
Well, I like that taste now. I find that if I buy the baby arugula, it's not as bitter if I buy regular arugula.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to try that with arugula. I'm growing some now in my garden.
I guess it is bitter, but like you said, I kind of got used to the taste and I enjoy it now.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, do you, and I just wanted to show the color of the dandelion tea if I could, but we already talked about it. So, the color there, you know what? It's not going to come out super green because I use so much water. Okay, well, this isn't much of a demo then of green tea, but anyway, this cooking water is dandelion leaf tea. You can make it less bitter if you add more water, but that's your dandelion leaf tea. So very good for you, and I'll just save it all in the fridge.
Nice.
Yeah, so do we have time to look at some other plants on the PowerPoint?
Love to see more plants.
Okay, all right, well, all right, so I'm going to share my screen. So I think I did 4. Let's see. Okay, have you seen that one before?
Probably.
Yeah, so this one, and hopefully people who are watching this will ring a bell, especially if you're a gardener. You've probably seen this before. This is found throughout the whole United States, and it's called lamb's quarters or goosefoot or wild spinach. And it's called wild spinach because it's a close relative to spinach and is used similarly in cooking. So this one, the way you recognize it is that the leaves have a mealy white coating that rubs off, and we'll look at that again in the next slide. But one thing to know, people always think of Chenopodium album as the main species of lamb's quarters, but there's actually a bunch of different species. I only say that to say you'll see some variation in what it looks like. So this is, this one is a little darker green and it has a little bit more teeth on the margins, but it's still lamb's quarter. It has this white mealy stuff that rubs off, and I like to wash that off before I use it. And the leaves alternate around the stem. And that's just another one, which has just really long leaf stalks. This is one of the quelites that's used in Mexican cuisine. Mm-hmm. And all of the lamb's quarters have these kind of white mealy balls that are flowers and fruits at the top of them. So if you think the plant, you can look for those as an additional identifying feature. And this is the stage that you would gather it at. So for me, I don't want to fiddle with picking individual leaves. It's too much work, But you can eat the stems as long as they're tender. So it's just like picking asparagus. You break it at that bend easy point. So here you would break it at the bend easy point, and then you can use this whole piece. When I chop it up to prepare it, I chop the stems up a little bit into smaller pieces and then use the leaves more rough chopped. So you can eat this one raw. This is a pesto. I think I made this before I was plant-based, but you can make a pesto with lemon and nuts and omit the oil and the cheese. So uh, the one thing about it is I like to cook it better because it reduces any bitterness you
Yeah.
might have, and it also reduces a compound called oxalates
Mm-hmm.
that are responsible for that squeaky teeth that you get when you eat spinach. You
Mm,
also get it from the wild spinach. So yeah, so that's lamb's quarters.
that's neat.
And then you know this one, right?
Probably should, but well, no, it's got the
This
yolk.
is it's
Mhm.
the one you've eaten.
Oh, purslane. I didn't realize it had a yellow flower. That's what threw me off.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, later in its development it has a yellow flower, and you can still use it when it's flowering, or you can use it before.
Hmm.
But yeah, it has these kind of succulent paddle-shaped leaves like a miniature jade plant, a very common garden weed throughout most of the country. Okay. Yeah. Here are some identifying features. The clear sap is an important one because there's a plant that kind of looks like it that has white sap that is not edible. But you can eat the leaves, the tender stems, the flowers, even the seeds when the seeds come out. So that is just a beautiful lush carpet of verdolagas, and you can snip that and give it a haircut, and you have, salad greens. So when you ate it raw, how did you have it?
Well, when I would buy it, I would just put it, chop it up and put it in salads. But like I said, at Rancho La Puerta, they would steam it as a side dish, just like you would spinach.
Oh, really? They just steam it, just plain steamed?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
Yep.
okay. And this is what it looks like when it's a little more sparse and you can see the reddish stems. It's kind of a crawling plant. And this, again, if anyone is a gardener, they're probably recognizing this plant. Right next to it is a plant that kind of looks like it, but it's a different plant. And it's actually a toxic plant that looks like it, but it doesn't have succulent leaves. It has very thin leaves. And here's another, well, I'll show you that in a minute. I have another slide of that. This was actually a market in Mexico where it was for sale. So, purslane is used around the world. It's not just Mexico. I mean, we don't use it as much in the US as we could, but I had some, let's see if I have these comments here. Uh, well, anyway, I've had comments from people around the world like Vietnam, Crete, Italy, everybody has a way that they like this. Sweet and sour soup in Vietnam, salads in Crete. So I just feel like it's something that we could use more in the States if we recognized it and could just pick it from our gardens.
How do you get children to eat these types of things?
They seem to really get excited. I mean, when I teach classes, sometimes I do things with some fruit, like I do a cucumber fruit salad where I chop up wild foods and put those in there. And of course, then you have the familiar flavors and then you have the wild flavors mixed in. So sometimes that's easier for people to be comfortable with a wild flavor because there are a lot of flavors in wild food that people just haven't tried before. So you're either someone who really likes new flavors or you're someone who's turned off by new flavors. Yeah, it depends on the person. This is the worst picture ever, but I do like, and this isn't even the salad I like to make with purslane. Was experimenting with a recipe from this cookbook where you used a French dressing. This was years ago, but I do like it in like a caprese style salad with tomato and garlic, cucumber, balsamic. And that was the look-alike plant that isn't purslane. So
Did you just say balsamic?
yeah.
Yeah, well, you're going to get 2 free bottles of California balsamic just for appearing on Chef AJ Live.
Really?
Yeah, every first time guest
Oh, that's
in
wonderful.
the
Thank
US.
you.
Yeah, you're well. That's
Gosh.
pretty. The little purple in the middle is pretty on this.
Yeah, isn't that pretty? And that's a toxic plant. So that's the one that looks kind of like purslane, but has the thin leaves and also has this white latex. So purslane has clear sap. When you see these side by side, they're almost not lookalikes. They're pretty dissimilar, but just so people are aware that that's out there. All right, this one. Have you seen these?
Yes, we used to blow those and make a wish when we were little.
Yeah, and so these are like much bigger than a dandelion. So you recognize the oversized ones?
Yeah, I just didn't know what they were, but we used to, like I said, we used to blow them in the
Yeah,
wind.
cool. Yeah, so this is a plant called Salsify or Salsify. In Europe, they cultivate a version, well, I guess in the States too, of it, and it's called oyster plant, and the roots are eaten. But yeah, so Salsify plants have yellow or purple flower heads. The cultivated ones are purple. And the leaves are kind of grass-like, but they too have a white latex. They are also related to dandelions. So you can eat any part of the salsify if it's at the right growth stage.
Salsify. I thought it was salsify.
I probably am saying it
Oh, I
wrong.
don't know.
Well, I always go salsify, salsify because I'm not actually sure how most people pronounce it. Yeah, but this, the flower is kind of dandelion-like, and this is two different species of the same plant. They're both edible. This is before it's flowering, and the part I like the best, that's the easiest to gather, are these young buds. This is a young bud that hasn't opened yet, and those young buds, along with the attached stalk, make a really delicious, just a steamed or boiled vegetable. They're almost sweet for a plant. They're really nice. The thing is, when you're gathering them, you have to watch out for the ones that already opened into a puff head, like the one in the center, and that it has closed back up and it's full of fluff. So if you boil that and you bite it, you just won't be able to chew it very much. It won't be as lovely as a culinary experience, but it's totally not going to hurt you. But you want the young buds that are still flanked in leaves and their attached stalks for the vegetable. This is just a view of what the plant looks like in flower. And that's just a close-up of what I would be eating, that bud that's still flanked in leaves, including the stalk with it because it's tender and it's part of the vegetable. But I use this in wild food classes a lot, and people just love this one.
That is very pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty, isn't it? The curly ones in particular grow in my yard. So once they're past their prime, they also get kind of this swollen base here. So that's another way to tell that's not one that you would eat that's already opened. Okay, and that's just the part I'm eating. Okay, I think this might be the last one. Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, so this is curly dock. Curly dock or dock is sometimes called sorrel, and it's closely related to garden sorrel if you've ever eaten that. But these have dark green rubbery leaves. There's lots of species, and we can look at some of these other features as we go along. That is a curly dock plant. So right now in Denver, that's what we're seeing. And you could see them like on the highway margins. There's tons of them everywhere. Of course, you wouldn't eat a plant growing on a highway margin. But the best time to get curly dock is a little bit younger. Oh, curly dock also makes these rust red seed stalks that in the fall it'll have green leaves coming up from the base. But this is a picture that I think people might recognize as dock.
It almost looks like, what am I thinking? Just like little shafts of wheat almost.
Yeah, oh, well, the seed stalks, yeah, yeah. But yeah, and people who eat those seeds, they're pretty astringent. They kind of suck the moisture out of your mouth. But I think the best part of dock is when you see a plant like this in the spring, and the leaves in the center are just coming and opening up. Those are the fresh leaves that you would use for food. There's a close-up of them. So they unroll sideways. And when they're still rolled up, that means they're still fresh. If they've just unrolled, you can see this kind of has these marks on the leaf showing the one on the left is it just unrolled. Both of those make good food. You can take the leaf blade along with the stem that it's attached to. And another indicator that it's fresh is that it has this slimy stuff that you can see on my fingers. Like there's actual slime at the base of the leaf. That means it's fresh and good eating.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Do animals in nature tend to eat these plants?
Well, this one gets, in our region, this one gets eaten by, I see it getting eaten by beetles, by green beetles. I'm not sure how much I've seen it grazed, but the last plant, the Salsify, that one, the deer just love it. They go for it and they crop it down and then it just branches more, which is really nice. So I would say some of them probably. And so this is, gathering the dock. I've also probably got some young flower stalks in there, and that's okay. Those are edible too. So I've got rolled up leaves, starting to open leaves, maybe some flower stalks, but the papery sheath that you can see on the right is kind of tough. So you peel that off. And then, yeah, you can use dock lots of different ways. I like it better cooked, but this is actually stuffed dock leaves in the tradition of my Polish grandmother's stuffed cabbage. And I read in ethnobotany about how dock is used in Eastern Europe. And these dock leaves are also used for stuffing leaf wrapped dishes like grape leaves or stuffed cabbage. So I do this, and then I do like a tart sweet tomato sauce over top and bake it for a couple hours. The filling, of course, the original fillings were like meat and grains. So now I've just been playing with different grain and vegetable
Yeah, like
fillings.
quinoa and things like that, maybe,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, it's still grandma's dish, just a little bit different. Okay, wild food plants. We already talked about this. You only eat it if you're 100% sure what it is. Is this okay time to mention my classes?
Yeah, yeah. I always want to ask at the end if people wanted to connect with you, how could they connect with you and on social media or whatever it is you have to offer with this wild edible world?
Sure. Okay, so let me show my last slide, and I put the coupon. Is that okay?
Of course, we'll
Your
put it in the
coupon.
show notes as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, I teach edible wild plant classes if anyone is interested in, like, that slideshow I just showed is an excerpt of my edible weeds class, which is longer. We do get into a little more detail in how to identify things. And I do invite people to, send me messages if you want to just double check your ID, because I want you to make use of these plants. But I teach live classes in Colorado, hands-on classes, cooking with the wild edible plants. But I've also started last year this series of web classes that are just $20 each. There's different topics. You can see over here, I just did wild mustard greens and poisonous plants, which obviously you're not eating. And I have wild onions and garlic coming up. But the slideshow I just showed was edible weeds. So those are $20 each. Try to price them affordably so people can get an in-depth understanding of plants that they might want to use for cooking, and especially plant-based people who like to eat plants. But yeah, but then I also have I have a membership program, which is called WFG Learn. That's Wild Food Girl. Yeah. And that one is currently for one price for the year or monthly, you get all of the classes. I have 10 right now. And then, for as long as you're a member, you get all the new ones on top of those 10. And I also have these magazines that you can see on the right. I produced those some years ago, but I have about 1,000 pages of wild food content in those for anyone that wants to join the membership. And if you want to get 25% off, there's a code for your viewers.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And are these done on Zoom Live or are they recorded?
Right. So all the upcoming ones are done on Zoom Live, and then I make them available as replays for the same price, or for people who can't come to them. So there are currently, I want to say there's 9 replays up there right now covering mushrooms, berries, plants, weeds, and then other ones are coming up that I'll start scheduling here soon.
So, but should we be, you're not supposed to eat wild mushrooms, are you? Like that you see growing out in.
Yeah, yes, you don't want to just go eat any wild mushroom you see. That is definitely true. In fact, a person who doesn't have the information they need is more likely to poison themselves with mushrooms than they are with plants, but you could poison yourself with either if you.
When you say poison yourself, do you mean like actually die or just get really sick?
Depends on what you ate and how much you ate and what you weigh.
Wow.
Yeah, so that poisonous plants class that I just did, we talked about a lot of that. So like some plants are highly poisonous and deadly, and some mushrooms are. And then some are violently poisonous and you end up in the hospital, but you won't die. And then some will just make you sick. And so, and a lot are used for medicine. So there's this fine line between, you know, a medicinal plant and a poisonous plant. A small amount of poison can be a medicine. But so yeah, it is possible. If I would want to impress upon people that what you don't want to do is be that person who walks out. Oh, I'm interested in foraging. I don't have a book and I don't know anything. Here's a plant. Oh, that looks kind of like carrot greens. Let me eat that one. Well, that one might be poison hemlock because that's in the carrot family and the leaves look a bit like greens. However, it is entirely possible to do this safely if you learn a plant one by one. I mean, you've eaten the verdolagas, you saw the pictures of it. You could get into more depth, get a book or two, and compare multiple features against the plant you're looking at until you're 100% confident, or work with an expert. And then when you're 100% confident, you're always going to recognize that plant after that. And now that's one more vegetable that you can add to your repertoire.
Very cool. Well, the nice thing about this is it's basically free, huh?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And when I switched to plant-based, I also switched a lot of things. I went to fully organic. Well, I guess as organic as I can be. And it's it's expensive. It does add up. So I like my free vegetables too, for sure.
Nice. Well, this is really interesting. Thank you so much. If people want to connect with you other than what you put in the show notes, do you have a social media platform that you tend to go to the most that people can find you?
Yep, and so I've been posting. You can see my handles at the bottom of the page, on the bottom of the screen there, and then I can stop sharing my screen in a second here. But yeah, so I have a Facebook page and an Instagram that I post to pretty regularly. I've just started putting all of my reels and videos up on YouTube. I think there's 50 videos up there too.
Wow.
So yeah, I am going to stop sharing this screen now.
Nice. Well, I'm sure your next step is a cookbook with all these wild edibles.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, I don't consider myself a chef, but if people visit my website, you may see older recipes that I did before I became plant-based that do have ingredients that I don't use anymore and that you might not want to use either. So I have actually been working to come up with vegan SOS-free alternatives. And so I am thinking of putting those together into some downloadable form that people can make use of, like the dandelion root coffee. I have the dandelion root coffee nice cream with little bits that make it taste like cookies and cream. That's a fun one. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me. I love your work. When I found you, I was just so excited because I was trying to invent all my own plant-based stuff. And I really like your approach to cooking and your delicious recipes. So thank you. I can't wait for your dessert recipe.
Yes.
Dessert book coming out,
Well,
right?
thank you. Thank you for mentioning it so I don't have to. It's coming out this summer. You can order it with the links below in the show notes as well, and save your receipt because we're going to offer over $1,000 worth of virtual bonuses when it comes out. Thank you so much for the plug.
Yeah, honestly, I have such a sweet tooth and I'm really excited for that book. So yeah, cool.
Well, thank you so much, Erica.
Yeah, thank you too. It's been a pleasure. It's an honor to be on your show.
A lot of fun. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow for another great show.